Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch. I'm your host, VIKAS SWARUP. In this week's episode, we examine India's ties with a neighbor that has been in the eye of the storm for the past several months and where India has significant economic and strategic interests. I'm talking about Myanmar, which has been in turmoil since the 1st of February 2021, when the military seized control of the country in a coup and detained Aung San Suu Kyi and other leaders of the National League of Democracy that had won a landslide victory in the elections of November 2020. India-Myanmar relations are built on shared spiritual, historical, linguistic and ethnic ties. Buddhism is a binding force between the two countries, as is the presence of a 200,000 strong population of Indian origin in Myanmar. India and Myanmar share a long land border of 1,643 kilometers and a maritime boundary of 725 kilometers in the Bay of Bengal. Four northeastern states, namely Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur and Mizoram, border Myanmar and share ethnic ties. That is why India and Myanmar have formed a unique arrangement called the Free Movement Regime, which is currently suspended due to COVID-19, which allows the tribes living at the border to go up to 16 kilometers on the other side of the border and stay there for 14 days without a visa. Therefore, peace and stability in Myanmar remains of utmost importance to India. Myanmar's membership of ASEAN, BIMSTEC and Mekong-Ganga cooperation imparts added significance in the context of our Act East policy. When we speak of trade, Myanmar is the natural gateway to Southeast Asia. India is the fourth largest trading partner of Myanmar, with bilateral trade as US dollars 1.67 billion in 2021-22. Agriculture is the dominant sector, particularly supply of beans, pulses and timber to India. India is also the 11th largest investor in Myanmar, with an approved investment of US dollars 773 million by 34 Indian enterprises. Most of India's investments have been in the oil and gas sector, with pharmaceutical exports being another fast-growing area. India has extended development assistance to Myanmar on generous terms, and our assistance portfolio is now around $2 billion. The bulk of the assistance is grant-funded. Two flagship projects are the Kaladan Multimodal Transit Transport Project, which aims to connect northeast India with Kolkata through the Sitwe port of Myanmar via the Bay of Bengal, and the Trilateral Highway Project connecting our northeast with Myanmar and Thailand. India is also extending assistance and capacity building in areas such as public health, disaster management and heritage conservation. We are upgrading roads and the rail transportation system, developing hydropower projects, setting up industrial IT and entrepreneurship development centers and providing high-speed data links. India has also supplied more than 20 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to Myanmar till date. To learn more about the developments in that country and India-Myanmar ties, I am now joined by two outstanding experts. Ambassador RAJIV Bhatia is Distinguished Fellow, Gateway House, and former Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs. During a 37-year innings in the Indian Foreign Service, he served as ambassador to Myanmar and Mexico and as High Commissioner to Kenya, South Africa and Lesotho. A prolific columnist, he is also the author of a book, India-Myanmar Relations, Changing Contours, and two other books on India's contemporary foreign policy and India-Africa relations. Dr. SHANKARI Sundararaman is professor at the Center for Indo-Pacific Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her areas of research relate to Southeast Asia with a particular focus on Indonesia, Cambodia and Myanmar. Let me begin with you, Dr. Sundararaman. Now, Myanmar has been near absolute military control since gaining independence in 1948. And even in the wake of the 2008 democratic reforms, the Tatmadaw remained a driving force in domestic politics. What is the reason for the outsized role of the military in Myanmar's polity?
Let me start with an interesting experience that I had when I went on a visit to Mandalay, where I saw this hoarding which says that the Tatmadaw shall never betray the national cause. To my mind, that was one of the ways in which I could see how entrenched the military was within the Myanmarese political system. And if you look at the role, I think this actually goes back to the role that the military played during the independence, because it was the military that was organized by General Aung San, the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, which actually began the actual conflict against the British presence in the country. So it is at that time in 1962 that you see this shift under General Ne Win, when the military became part, the military coup took place, and almost from then onwards, what we are seeing is this constant presence of the military. So systematically what the military has done is to reinvent itself to continue to stay in power. 2008 was actually a very controversial referendum towards the constitution, and it has 3 basic articles within its provisions which allows the military to continue to stay in power. The first is 417, Article 417, which actually talks about an emergency role for the military in case there is any threat to the national unity and integrity. The second is 59F does not allow Aung San Suu Kyi to become the, the highest office, reach the highest office because of her foreign connection. And similarly, Article 436 is probably, in my mind, the most difficult to resolve, because what it does is to give the military 25% seats in the parliament.
Now, Ambassador Bhatia, despite the United Nations Secretary General and others condemning the military takeover, and the US, the UK and the EU all imposing sanctions on the military junta, India has taken a more measured approach to the unfolding situation. While we have voiced strong support for the restoration of democracy and the release of all political detainees, including Aung San Suu Kyi, we have not joined the chorus of Western condemnation. So what is driving India's approach? And what are the pitfalls of the West strategy of isolation and sanctions?
For the West, Myanmar is far too distant a land. Despite successive generations of diplomats from Asia and scholars from Asia trying to bring the reality, the complex reality of Myanmar to the Western policy makers, I'm afraid we have not been able to do a good job. So they simply get driven by ideology and sentiments. India does not share this kind of approach. India does not believe in individual nation sanctions, and as you rightly yourself pointed out, UN has not imposed any sanctions as such. So why do we not follow them? Because we know this country very well. Long before the US and Europe discovered Myanmar, Indian traders, monks, people, historians were taking deep interest in Burma or Brahma's golden land. We ought to know, and therefore we know that this is a nation which is a very complex nation. It's a nation where the state has really not been able to complete the process. So the nation has not been able to complete the process. And the past almost 70 years has been a story, has just been brought out between the military and civilian elements, and the tussle and the task goes on. With regard to the pitfalls, I think we have to appreciate that clearly the West's imbalanced strategy and policy continues to drive Myanmar more and more deeply into the embrace of China. So fundamentally, actually, Western governments should ask the question, are they here in terms of winning the contest against China, or are they here to help China to win the contest against them? This contradiction is very significant.
I think one of those elements pertains to border security. And there, let me bring up the ambush of an Assam Rifles convoy in Churachandpur district in Manipur in November last year, in which we lost 4 security personnel, including as well as the commanding officer and his family. Now, the attack was claimed by the People's Liberation Front and the Manipur Naga People's Front, which both operate out of Myanmar. So has the Myanmar army displayed an understanding of India's security concerns, and how are the two countries working to prevent such incidents from recurring in the future?
This was a very unfortunate, very tragic incident, and I think we should take this opportunity to once again convey our deep condolences to all those, our own people who lost their lives. They were doing their duty. They knew what some of these insurgent groups have been up to, lot of illegal international crime, narco trafficking and the rest of it. While we cannot talk too much about this in detail, the fact is that that area have the potential of creating serious complications. And this is one major reason why Indian policy has to ensure good relationship with those who wield power in Myanmar. If it is the Myanmar military, we have no choice but to have cordial and cooperative relationship. In the past, I know for sure, because as you know, I was there for 3 years, the Myanmar military took a very sympathetic and supportive position, and they always argued at that time that the terrain is a problem, and if India is able to help in building some of the infrastructure, they would always be willing to help us to ensure that our security needs are fulfilled. But beyond security, the reason why Indian policy is pragmatic and prudent is also because India is committed to the policy to develop a close relationship with all elements of the Myanmar polity, not just the government, not just the opposition, but the rest of the polity as well. And this has been the policy right from day one of India's independence. And finally, I think it is well known that there is a India-China contest that goes on. China has expanded its footprint in that country. It is a matter of serious concern to India.
Now, Dr. Sundaraman, as you said, Myanmar has been a member of ASEAN since 1997. But ASEAN seems to be divided in its response to the military coup in Myanmar. How do you see the current ASEAN position on Myanmar?
I would look at it in 3 ways. One is the diplomatic response, a kind of a political response, and the humanitarian response, which I think the humanitarian response also will highlight some of the limitations of ASEAN. On the diplomatic front, if you look from 1997, when you said that they joined ASEAN, the ASEAN's policies of both the constructive and the flexible engagement with Myanmar were very, very relevant in terms of bringing Myanmar into the ASEAN fold. It was seen as a diplomatic way of socializing Myanmar into the context of the ASEAN processes and the ASEAN way in that sense. If you look at the current situation in the aftermath of last year's military coup, I think the ASEAN's political response has been somewhat weaker, because what they have done is, on the one hand, they've spoken about getting a commitment from the military government to give a date on which the electoral process will be, will go back to resume the electoral process. And the second thing they've done is to sort of ignore the ground realities, because between 2010 and 2021, there's been about a decade of electoral reforms, political reforms in the country, which have actually changed the reality on the ground. And last year in April 2021, the ASEAN had a special summit on Myanmar, for which General Min Aung Hlaing was present, which came up with this 5-point consensus. And the consensus was particularly on a ceasefire, on addressing negotiations between the two sides, on appointing an envoy, on elections, and on humanitarian assistance. Now, if I come to the last point of the humanitarian, what Min Aung Hlaing did was to go back and completely undermine the process, saying that there is no law and order, and so the ceasefire cannot be implemented. Now, my final point is on the humanitarian issue. When you come to the humanitarian issue, this is coordinated by the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance, which actually is equipped to help in cases of natural disasters, not in the context of a political crisis. Because the ASEAN has a key pillar on non-intervention in domestic affairs.
Ambassador Bhatia, development cooperation, as you mentioned, is a very important component of India-Myanmar partnership. How do you evaluate it? And can projects like the Kaladan multimodal project and the trilateral highway become game changers for the entire region?
Development cooperation is undoubtedly a major facet in the relationship, because India is in a position, given the present state of its development, to assist Myanmar, which needs all kinds of assistance. It is on a very broad scale or a broad canvas. So, it is not just the mega projects, but also medium-sized projects and also mini projects. In the latter two categories, I think over the years, India has done a whole lot of things, keeping in mind the needs of the people. At the same time, what we call the quick impact projects, and that was done in the border area, that is between India and Myanmar as well. Your query about the mega projects, Kaladan and trilateral highway project, these are truly big projects. They are potentially game changers, undoubtedly. I think I appreciate that phrase. The only difficulty is that we have been taking time to complete them. I think it's important for scholars and observers to understand that sometimes with the best of intentions and the best of efforts, you are unable to complete these projects in time, because there are factors beyond your control. And specifically now, ever since the coup has created an extraordinary situation, our people have said that they are striving hard, they have struggled to complete, but if there is a security situation that is coming as an impediment, we have to appreciate. So hopefully, in the short to medium term, all this would become a reality, and then I think India-Myanmar connectivity would be very, very strong.
Dr. Sundaraman, now China is Myanmar's largest neighbor and biggest trading partner. Myanmar has joined the Belt and Road Initiative, and a China-Myanmar economic corridor is progressing. Yet the two countries share a rather complicated relationship. How do you see China's role in Myanmar?
Okay. You know, traditionally, when you look at the China-Myanmar relations, it's actually described by a term called Pokpa. And Pokpa actually means siblings born from the same mother. So there is, in that sense, for several years, this kind of a special relationship which China and Myanmar have shared. But this is not to say that the military government has been completely comfortable with China, because if you see the early years of Myanmar's independence, all the insurgent movements that were coming into Myanmar were from China.
From China.
And particularly the Burmese Communist Party had a lot of support from the Chinese government. And as a result of it, not just Burma, but the whole region of Southeast Asia has been wary of the Chinese insurgency and the support to insurgency. However, what we have to see is that when we look at from 1962 onwards, when Western sanctions, I think Ambassador Bhatia also raised this entire question on how the stranglehold of sanctions has impacted Myanmar. And when we look at how Western sanctions have actually impacted Myanmar, it was China that stood as a steadfast friend with Myanmar. And it was the trade relations with China that continued to keep the, the economic viability of the regime alive. And in that sense, I think what we have to see is that Chinese assistance to the regime has actually been a key aspect to sustaining the military in the politics of Myanmar. Now, when the political reform started from 2010 onwards, what you saw was also the influx of much more investment coming in from Western countries. I think when you look at the last visit by President Xi Jinping to Myanmar in 2020, January 2020, you see that they signed nearly 33 agreements in order to ensure that Myanmar would receive about 4 billion yuan over a period of 3 years. And the focus of that was to ensure that the infrastructure capabilities within Myanmar, especially those relating to the China-Myanmar economic corridor, would be established to a viable extent for it to fit into the BRI's requirements. And this is where I think the shift was that China wanted to bring Myanmar very clearly back into the BRI discussions, and it was not that Myanmar was averse to the idea. Now, ever since the coup, what we've seen is that the Chinese have faced a kind of a dichotomy, because on the one hand, they've said that they have not given a tacit support to the military, but they have said that this is an internal matter. They've even gone as far to say that it's a reshuffling, political reshuffling. But at the same time, they have said that there is a need to restore the political process. So in that sense, the Chinese statements have seen a lot of anti-China sentiment within the country. At the same time, the Chinese have three very clear priorities. One, the Chok Phu port that is there in the western part of Myanmar. The second is that they are concerned about the instability in the northern areas, because Yunnan and Bammo are very close to each other in the Kachin state. But as long as the military can provide stability, political stability internally, the Chinese will continue to do business with them.
Tensions between Buddhist and Muslim communities in Myanmar's Rakhine state have escalated dramatically since August 2017, leading to a massive migration crisis. How has India responded to the crisis in the Rakhine state?
It was a challenge for Indian diplomacy because the two main countries directly involved are both friends of India. Bangladesh and which received over a period of time, over 1 million refugees, Rohingya refugees, driven there by the military operation in Myanmar. On the other hand, as we understood and explained, there are constraints beyond which India cannot go, and India has to befriend Myanmar. The main essential focus of India was to advise and urge and support the idea that these refugees should go back in a orderly manner, in a safe manner, in a manner in which they feel comfortable. And meanwhile, India helped refugees while they are in Bangladesh. At the same time, it also helped Myanmar in terms of preparing ground for the eventual return. So, we built temporary homes which eventually were handed over, although the refugees are yet to go back. Also, there were internally displaced people, and it was not just the Muslims but also Buddhists who have been affected. So, India tried to help them as well. I think it is to the credit of the Indian government that it has shown deep sensitivity to the human aspects of this problem, while making it clear that in terms of political and diplomatic dimensions, a problem comes up, it has to be resolved through bilateral dialogue, and the principal parties in this are Myanmar and Bangladesh, not India.
Dr. Sundaraman, how can we leverage Buddhism and our shared cultural heritage for closer people-to-people ties with Myanmar?
Okay. When we look at the initiation of what is called the Act East policy, I think when Prime Minister Modi made this reference, it was in Myanmar. And what he said was, I think there was that reference to the 3 C's, where you bring in connectivity, commerce and culture as critical aspects, and the 4th was capacity building. And what is very interesting is that earlier this was in November of 2014. Earlier on a visit in August 2014 by our foreign minister, then foreign minister Srimati Sushma Swaraj, she made the statement that Buddhism is a very critical link between India and Myanmar. And I think where this is very important is that this is an advantage that China does not have. The cultural linkage that India has with the region is something that the Chinese do not have. So, as a result, I think there is a sense that we can sort of leverage this in order to sort of promote people-to-people ties across the border, and also to sort of improve our relations with these countries, particularly in the context of Myanmar. Now, one of the aspects of the Act East policy was also to ensure that tourism becomes a bigger sort of revenue earner for both India as well as the region. And in that sense, there is this hope. I mean, there was this talk, many people have raised this, that you sort of create sister cities, sister cities or twin cities that are created where a tourist network can actually be created between these areas, promoting the movement of people, promoting people-to-people contact as a result of it. And I think this has come even earlier in the context when we examined the entire approach to how the BCIM was being evolved. Because at the end of it, Kunming and Kolkata were supposed to be the twin cities in the context of the BCIM. So, in the context, if you have to look at how we can sort of engage with Myanmar in this case, you have the Shwedagon Pagoda, you have Nepal, the Lumbini, regions of Lumbini, and you have Bodh Gaya. So, you are basically creating a network between the Buddhist circuit in this region, and this can also be expanded, in terms of looking at whether there is also, if you go beyond Myanmar, you also look at Siem Reap as an option, you look at Jogjakarta, and you look at southern states, Tanjore. I mean, that's an area where the architecture is so similar when you go look at these 3 areas. So, the point is that any form of cultural activity has to also integrate, the regions together. And I think that is where India and Myanmar can also look at the potential of exploring Buddhism as an option. And this will have a selling capacity as far as the ASEAN is concerned, because the ASEAN's community pillars, if you take the pillar on socio-cultural pillar, they are looking at these kind of options to promote tourism.
Ambassador Bhatia, the 200,000 strong population of Indian origin in Myanmar also faces some unique problems. What has the government of India been doing for them?
First of all, there is a lot of confusion about the numbers. I think the embassy normally claims that the number is probably 1.5 to 2 million people, but be that as it may, in terms of one's experience of dealing with different segments of the Indian diaspora, In earlier times, there was a large number of stateless
Yes.
people, you know, when they were given the chance, offered the Burmese citizenship. At that time, they were hesitant, they did not take it. And then later, you know, other regulations were brought in. But my impression is that it's not all that a serious problem today. They have been there for many decades. You have basically two sets of people, one who live in the larger towns such as Yangon and Mandalay, and they are involved in professional activities, trading, very well settled, contributing to the country and to the relationship with India. And then there is the other segment which is there in the Bagur division, essentially large number of people, you know, of origin from Bihar, indulging in regular agricultural activity, living virtually, you know, life of the times when they actually migrated there. It's a wonderful, very nice experience to go and interact with them and talk to them in the local dialect and the rest of it. So I would say that the main challenge today is obviously for us to remain connected with them, and this challenge that has come up, you know, once again the political upheaval in the country, which has really, I must honestly say, disrupted the regular bilateral relationship which was doing so well in terms of interaction. So we have to wait and see, but let us hope that a better tomorrow will come soon.
So thank you very much, Ambassador Bhatia and Dr. Sundaraman, for sharing your thoughts with our viewers. Myanmar is the only country that sits at the intersection of India's neighborhood first policy and its look east policy. As such, it is crucial for mutual growth, prosperity and security. India is closely monitoring the developments in Myanmar, working with international partners and doing its own bit to hasten the return of civilian rule to that country. That is all I have in this edition of Diplomatic Dispatch. Till we meet again next week, good night and goodbye.